Welcome in, everyone, to the Nordic Football Podcast. I'm Steve Wyss, and I'm with Jonathan Fadugba, as always. Lots to discuss since we were last on the show together. We've had some massive European results. Both the Allsvenskan and the Eliteserien are now roughly half a dozen games in. So it's exciting times getting into the spring, and the summer's going to be coming, Jonathan. It's that time of year where Scandinavian football rules the world. Ish.
Ish indeed, ish indeed. Hi, Steve. Hi, everyone. Yes, welcome to the Nordic Football Podcast. And it's been an interesting few weeks, of course. I think all eyes have been on Europe, haven't they, really, Steve? And that's where we're going to start this show. Conference League, Europa League. It's probably maybe a once-in-a-lifetime event that we've got two teams in the semi-finals of Europe, which we talked about on the last episode in great detail, much to our amazement and excitement at that time. We've had the first leg. And we're going to get into reviewing and previewing the second leg before we get into the latest goings on in Norway and Sweden. But how have you been, Steve? How did you find the first leg and first leg last week?
I'm all right. As we record right now, as I discussed off air, I'm a little bit tired physically, struggling after my first significant contribution in a cricket match on Saturday. So I'm kind of recovering. But mentally sharp as always. It's been, an interesting period, hasn't it, of games in the football world. The first legs, obviously, let's not beat about the bush. It was a disappointing night, wasn't it, for those who follow Scandinavian football and want the teams to do well. Djurgården got beat badly, 4-1 at home to Chelsea. And Bodø Glimt got beaten 3-1 by Tottenham. But what we must say is that both were significant underdogs, weren't they? So it's not like it's completely unexpected. We'll talk about the Glimt game now, but, I'll be honest, I was a little bit disappointed with them. I actually think they were lucky to only lose that 3-1. So they weren't quite as good as I expected. But I suppose at the end of the day, it is the result that matters. And only 2 goals down, it's anyone's game, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the first thing to do is recap the match, of course. As you said there, it was Tottenham 3, Bodø Glimt 1. Happy to tune into this as well. Had it sort of side-eye together with the other semi-finals. I think I kind of agreed with you, Steve, in your assessment there. I thought Glimt were a little bit lucky to get away with it, but I think that does open the door for them for a very exciting second leg, which we'll, of course, preview in a moment. The game ended, as you say, 3-1. Spurs kind of ran away with it in the early first half, didn't they? I think one of the earliest goals in European semi-final history, Brennan Johnson. In the first minute, literally, James Maddison and then Dominic Solanke. 3-0 after 60 minutes. He looked sort of done and dusted in at the tie. And there were several chances for Spurs to really wrap it up. I think really, to be honest, Steve, being frank, I think it probably could have been 5-0 at a certain point in the game, and that would have been tie over. Spurs had a couple of chances. And then, in a very Spurs-like fashion, Steve, I remember the captain Romero got booking for nothing, literally nothing, just petulance. And they just started to sort of turn a little bit, didn't they? And then a bit of nerves, and they gave away a goal.
Well, look, Spurs got off to a good start. We knew the first 15, 20 minutes was going to be pretty much all Spurs, really, didn't we? What we didn't want from a Norwegian perspective was them to get ahead, because that settles the fans down and everything. Just say Bodø Glimt had scored the first goal. I mean, there was talk pre-game if they lost the first leg that Andrew was going to get sacked. Probably far-fetched, but they're on tenterhooks, aren't they? Do you know what I mean? The point is it's a delicate balancing act at Spurs right now. But Spurs got the start they wanted, 1-0 after 1 minute, and then Maddison, scored before half-time. The stats for the game are alarming. I've got to be honest. I mean, just some stats here. This is from Flash Score. You might have some more detailed stuff on Wisecout maybe, but expected goals 3.06 to 0.26, 24 shots to 3, 7 shots on target to 1, 13 corners to 1. Glimt only had 1 shot in the second half. 1 shot. It was the goal. I mean, they were really beaten badly, and it should have been 5 or 6-0, and the tie should be over. Only Spurs could have only won that game by 2-0, Jonathan. Seriously, that was a very Spursy thing to do, wasn't it? To somehow only come out of that game 3-1. I mean, I suppose you've got to give credit to Spurs. They did have a good game plan. I thought they pressed really well for the first 70 minutes. They had, I think, a clear plan. They had clear pressing triggers to counteract the Glimt threat. It must be said, by the way, Glimt obviously were missing two massive players in midfield, Patrick Berg and Håkon Evjen. They also had Helmerson suspended. He would have been an option to come off the bench in attack. And Bjørtuft, the defender, was on the bench, didn't even come on. We know players like Blomberg, when maybe not fully fit, he did start, but he was a question mark. So it was a difficult team selection for them. But I think now we know just how important Patrick Berg and Håkon Evjen are to this Bodø Glimt team, because they just looked, they were overrunning midfield, and I suppose that was to be expected.
Yeah, Ulrik Saltner's got a goal. He was captain on the night as well, and it was a really well taken finish. I thought, like you said, there was hardly any chances for them in the game. I think he had two shots, but only one on target and one goal. From your point of view, Steve, you just mentioned there already absences in Glimt's team. How did they make up for that in midfield? What did you think of the setup that Kjetilsen put out? And then how do you think, looking ahead to the second leg, how will it change?
Well, I didn't like the setup, I've got to be honest. They put Jens Petter Hauger in the centre of midfield. He's not a central midfielder, I think it showed. And when he actually ended up cutting inside from the left in the second half at certain points, he was a lot better. The lad Vilad Nielsen got the start at centre-back, and this is someone who's he hasn't made many appearances for Glimt in his career. I think it was less than 10 last season. He hasn't had many minutes this year, and it showed. Bjørtuft's injury was really important at the back. Ulrik Saltner seemed to play a more advanced role in midfield, which surprised me. And they sat Sondre Fett more deeper. And I think I didn't really understand that. Saltner has played centre-back in his career. It would have surely made sense for him to be more deeper and give Fett more license to sort of roam. But I think they wanted to use Fett a bit like an annoying Yorkshire Terrier who would try and snap at their heels, press and stuff like that. So I'm not sure for once they got the setup right. But the problem is they've been such a well-run machine and a well-drilled outfit. This is not a team that make a lot of changes. Think of teams that chop and change all the time, like Guardiola and stuff down the years. Bodø Glimt are very consistent with their team. So for them to make this many changes or forced into it wasn't good for their rhythm. So I think we can let off, criticising how they set up, but at the same time, it was kind of needs must. So I don't think we can be too harsh on them. But they were overall very, very lucky to get out of the tie 3-1 down. Credit to Spurs. They had some good performances. Players that, honestly, for me, have been really flaky. I mean, I don't know about you, Jonathan, but James Maddison, I think he's a great talent, but he's often goes missing. Richarlison, we know what he's like. Very, very flaky player, but he had a good night. A lot of these flaky players had a good night for Spurs. It's like they raised it on the night, so fair play to them. See what they can do in the Arctic Circle now.
I thought you were about to go full Roy Keane there on James Maddison for a minute, but I mean, he'll miss. I think the reports are saying he'll miss the second leg. He picked up an injury, and that is where if we start looking ahead to the second leg, this is where it could change for Glimt a little bit. They've got two injuries, obviously Solanke as well. So both goal scorers, it looks like two of the goal scorers, potentially could miss the second leg. Kjetilsen was an interesting one after it. He said we were in an extremely difficult situation given a goal away after 40 seconds. That is unforgivable, he said. You saw when Tottenham conceded, they were very disappointed and lost energy. If you ask me, we should have gone for the second goal, but I think we can take a lot of energy with us from this match into the next one. He said it will be completely different for us at AS Primera. We have a chance. We're not favourites, but we just have to go for it. Hopefully we can handle situations in the build-up game better than in this match. So, I mean, his analysis is pretty spot on in terms of Spurs losing a bit of energy after the goal. I mean, I thought Glimt could have even, they got one or two corners, didn't they? Or they had a few attacks after the goal that, it could have even narrowed the deficit further. And it ended up being a game that, although they could have lost it 5-0, like you say, like we've just said there, there's a lot of positives to take, isn't there? 2-goal deficit, they're going back home. What is going to be different from the second leg? Because a lot of Spurs fans that I've spoken to some are a bit nervous. Some are thinking, they know the reputation of their club. but the general feeling amongst the English media is that this one's done and dusted.
Well, I think what we've got to remember is Bodø Glimt are not really a very good side playing on natural grass. Anywhere, really. Even domestically, they've had some issues on the grass surfaces, but they're unbelievably good on artificial. I mean, here's the key stat here, Jonathan. Since they entered European competition, again, in the 2020 season, they've had 30 wins at Aspmyra Stadion in European matches, 1 draw and 60 defeats. That's an incredible record. 30 wins, 1 draw, 60 defeats. They've beaten a lot of big teams here. I believe it might be one of the biggest fortresses in entire European football. I mean, I include a lot of the big grounds and big teams in this as well. It's so unique. You're in the Arctic Circle. This artificial pitch is really, really massive advantage for them. They absolutely battered Lazio. They could have beaten Lazio 4-5-0. And then obviously we know they struggled in Rome. So it's not perhaps unusual that they struggle away from home. But they're completely different at home. And this is why some Spurs fans might be nervous. I mean, based on the stats, I think you've probably got to say Bodø Glimt win the second leg. I think that's fair to say. I really do think it's fair to expect them to actually win the second leg. Can they win by more than 1 goal? That's the question, Jonathan. And if they were to win by more than 1 goal, could they then go and win in extra time penalties again? So I think we're in for a really nervous night. Spurs are going to be tested mentally. And look, Glimt never got on top of them in the first leg. But if they take the lead in Norway, I mean, this Spurs side could collapse like a pack of cards. Seriously. I mean, they have historically no backbone when it really matters. So I wouldn't trust them to... Spurs have got to play really well again. The first goal is important. But I think you've got to presume that it was going to be Spurs, even if they make the final, won't do it easily, will they? They're not that sort of team. They won't make life easy for themselves. So I think there's more twists and turns to come. If it was 3 or 4-0, that would feel a bit unsurmountable, wouldn't it? But 3-1 down, they're back in the game. They're big players. The key players are coming back to return. The artificial surface. The only thing is, I think the weather it's not quite as cold this time of year. If it was in January, February, that would be even harder for Spurs. But I think it's going to be around 8 to 10 degrees. So the weather probably isn't a factor for once. But Glimt have got every chance. And it wouldn't shock me if... I expect them to win the second leg. I do. By how many goals, I'm not sure.
Is that the sound of you on the fence then? Sounds like you're sitting on the fence a little bit. Let me just read some of the comments from Kieto Knudsen, and then we'll get a prediction from you if you want to get off that fence. He said, and he kind of alludes to what you've just mentioned there in terms of artificial surface. He said, for me, there's a massive difference between playing a match on grass and artificial turf. In the grass matches, we have to be closer in the duel game for us to come out victorious. We lose too much in these types of situations on grass, and that irritates me a bit. He sounds a little bit frustrated after this game, doesn't he, really? He's called it unacceptable, the opening goal, and now he's talking about how irritated he is. The other thing is that we lose the ball too many losses. We have too many ball losses. So there are a lot of technical things that apply playing on grass. So he's kind of alluded to, just what you said there as well, the differences between playing on artificial and grass. Steve, what is your prediction? I mean, I think that Glimt have got a really good chance here. I'm tempted to say I think they'll go through, but I'm not quite sure. I think Spurs are going to be really up against it in this game. They've already got history, Spurs, on artificial turf this season. They played Tamworth in the FA Cup. Obviously, that went to extra time, and they got a victory, and that was a National League side, non-league. So that was a 0-0. They've now got to go to one of the best teams on artificial turf, probably in Europe, who have got history of beating teams, Steve. I still haven't got that memory of the Jose Mourinho 6-1 out of the back of my head yet. The Glimt on their day can be fantastic. I genuinely think there's all to play for here. If Spurs get the first goal, that's a bit of a game changer, to be fair. But I think if Glimt get the first goal, we're in for one humdinger of a match. Steve, I've got 2 questions for you before we wrap up on this topic and move on. So, what is, from your point of view, the difference between playing on artificial and grass? And number 2, what is your prediction for this match?
I think the way things have been going for Glimt in Europe is, think of the amount of times that they've gone to extra time. That's twice already. They've had some really close games. So what about 3-1 again and we go to extra time? That actually feels about right to me, the way things have been going. Yeah, and then who knows beyond that? I don't think it's far fetched to say Glimt can go through. You know, that late goal just feels significant to me. It really does. They should be blown out the water. I've seen it before in sport. When a team does not put the other one away, they can regret it, and that just feels like this sort of situation. In terms of the difference between playing on artificial and grass, it almost sounds ridiculous to say that the best team in Norway are probably not very good at playing on grass, when most football across the world is played on grass. But they've just become, I said, their style and technique is so unique. If anyone wants to sort of know how you play on artificial and how you struggle to play on artificial, then I think the Lazio quarter-final first leg is a great one to watch. I mean, Lazio are a decent side. They're a decent, very decent Serie A side, and they just struggled. It's to do I think the weight of the pass is really unique. Until you get used to it, you're having a big problem with that. I think actually running on the surface as well, there's a type of runs that you can make. It's different to grass. I definitely get why teams struggle on artificial because they're not used to it. I remember that Tamworth game as well. There weren't much in the game for a while, was there? Spurs really, really struggled on that. But a lot of teams would have struggled on artificial because they're not used to it. What I don't get is why Bodø Glimt are not as good on grass, because they used to be all right on grass. But it feels like they've become quite poor on a grass surface. But a lot of the Eliteserien now is artificial, or at least semi-artificial. So I think it could be to do with that. They're just simply not used to playing on grass at all now. But it's a big difference, and there's no doubt in my mind it's a big advantage as well. And there's different types of artificial surface, by the way, Jonathan. What the Glimt artificial surface might be completely different to an artificial in a different league or a different country. That not all artificial surfaces are the same. Glimt know their own surface so well, though, so they do have a major, major weapon there to use to their advantage.
Yeah, and final point on this: no game for Glimt this weekend. Is that because they've been given a rest? And also, who will be back, and how do you expect the lineup to look? Who will be the big hitters that will come back?
This happens. The Norwegian League have allowed them to have the weekend off in preparation, and that could be important because forgetting just playing the game, then it means they're probably not picked up any injuries on the field. At least they could in training. But the midfield is going to be a lot different now. We're going to get Ulrik Saltnes joined by Håkon Evjen and that man Patrick Berg. I believe Patrick Berg is the best player in Scandinavia, in any Scandinavian league right now, including the Danish league. I think he's the best player. I really think he's a Rolls Royce of a player, Patrick Berg. Seriously, he controls it. He's like a quarterback for them. He's so important. So he's going to be back in the lineup, and Evjen as well, with Saltnes in the midfield. And then I think that the front three will be, it'll be Blomberg with Hauger and Kasper Wartz-Ho up front. Helmerson becomes an option up front for them off the bench now after his suspension, and they really need to get Bjørtoft back in the central defence alongside Gundersen. If not, then I would expect Breda Moo to be the man in that position. But otherwise, there will be quite a few changes from the first leg, Jonathan, which is really going to help Bodø Glimt out in this second leg.
Yep, tune in. It's going to be a really exciting game. Of course, history could be made. We talked about it on the last episode. This is genuinely unseen territory in Norwegian football history. They're 2 goals, maybe 3 goals away from the European final, Stephen. A potential game against Manchester United, even, who obviously won the first leg in the other semi-final 3-0 against Athletic Bilbao. So this is genuinely potential dream stuff. We'll move over to the other side of town in Europe, Steve, because we also had a game in the Conference League, Djurgårdens, as your famous commentator pronounces it, against Chelsea, the famous Londoners, and it didn't quite go maybe the way that people might expect. Well, I mean, it did go quite the way that people probably would expect, really, to be fair. A heavy defeat for Djurgården, Steve.
Yeah. The problem is, pre-game, if you just looked at the absentee list for Djurgården for this game, and it just looked completely insurmountable, really. I mean, even at full strength, it's going to be tricky against Premier League opposition at home. We're looking at a Chelsea side that are probably going to qualify for the Champions League. They've got a massive squad, one of the biggest squads in Europe. And, similar to Glimt, they just didn't get a good start. There was Jadon Sancho, of all people, scored after, I think it was about 15 minutes. And then a killer goal right on half-time, I thought, from Madueke. I think if it stayed 1-0 at half-time, Chelsea might have been in a position where they're like, okay, let's not maybe kick on too much here. They'd have been happy with just winning the game. But I think that second goal just forced Jørgen's hand. We look at the stats for the game. They did have the metrics aren't too bad for Jørgen here, but they had a lot of shots and stuff. But I think quality of chance, just Chelsea showed their extra class there. And it got a bit, at one point, I thought it was going to get really messy, to be honest. I mean, it was messy anyway, but it was like 4-0 after the hour. And I'm thinking, bloody hell, they could get hit 5 or 6 here. They did pull one back, Jørgen, and I'm glad they got a goal. And they gave it a go towards the end a bit. Obviously, knowing 4-1, they've got no chance. I mean, they knew that the odds were against them pre-game. I'm just a bit disappointed for them. They couldn't field the best 11 available to them. But it's been that sort of campaign, hasn't it? And they've done really well getting this far. And I don't think it's any disgrace that they're going to get knocked out by Chelsea. It was a full house. The fans hopefully enjoyed it, even though they lost. And, the fans that are going to go to Stamford Bridge, this is what it's all about, isn't it? For the fans, like I said, you're going to have a lot to be proud of. But, on that particular night, Chelsea were just too good, really.
Yeah, pre-match, there was some interesting sort of comments. It was said in the dressing room before the game that there'll be a 4-figure fine for any player requesting a player from Chelsea's shirt during the match. They were strictly banned to request shirts from, and one of the players commented, we're not tourists. So, they went into it with a professional mindset. Like you said, Steve, injuries has been a bit of an issue. They still managed to field, Stahl, Larsson, Danielson, Kosugi, Rinner in goal, who got quite a poor rating in the end from the apps. Findale, Stenson, Harala, Gullikson, Priska, and then Tokmak and Gwen up front. Obviously, you talked briefly about the score, so it ended 4-1. Jadon Sancho, Noni Madueke in the first half, put Chelsea 2-0 up. Nicholas Jackson then scored twice, really well taken goals, to be fair to him. And it did make me think when he scored the second goal, which was a brilliant taken finish. I started thinking, imagine some of these players playing in Allsvenskan. How would they be if they played in Allsvenskan? Like, would they really rip it up? Someone like Jackson, imagine him in Allsvenskan. Because he really, the way he took his fourth goal was like almost as if it was a bit too easy for him. But the good news for Diff, the young lad Isaac Alamayehu, he came off the bench and scored. He's a youngster, 18 years old, and that was a really positive thing for them. The bench was looking very light compared to Chelsea. I mean, if you look at Chelsea's bench, Steve, they had Neto, Malo Gusto. I mean, how much did he cost? Levi Colwill. They brought on a kid called Reggie Walsh off the bench, of course, as well, a young player. So, I mean, I was listening to Sky, and there's a really good quote from Jonathan Liu, I think, in the Guardian, who said that it was like bringing on the Avengers to settle a garden dispute, which I thought was a really good analogy, because Chelsea bought on Palmer, Caicedo, Jackson, and Chalobah, Steve, at half time, which is just ridiculous, to be honest. So that tells you the levels that we're talking about here, really, Steve, doesn't it? Before the game, obviously, as well, there was talk about, I thought there was an interesting comment from Maresca where he said that football's not about money, and it's not, money doesn't win matches on the pitch, but I mean, it kind of does, right? He said you don't win games with money, but when you've spent $1 billion, Steve, you kind of do win games with money. I mean, it's hard. I get what he's saying. They can't go out there and run for you, but yeah, I think you probably can win games with money, and that was the feeling, wasn't it, really, in this match, Steve?
Yeah, the whole Chelsea's entire run in this Conference League has felt that way, hasn't it? It's going to be interesting to see how it finishes. I would laugh if it resulted in a 90th minute Anthony winner for Real Betis against them in the final. But realistically, their squad is just far too good for the Europa Conference League. The millions that are on show out there. you just haven't got really any chance. You can maybe do well in a one-off game. Of course you can. And I think that's maybe where there's a little bit of disappointment from the Djurgården side, that there was a feeling maybe they could give them a little bit of a bloody nose at home. But I just think that the halftime score at 2-0, that was it. They had to do it in the first half. They didn't. If they could have got the first goal, might have made things interesting. It's just one of those. You can analyse it as much to death. You can analyse it to the finest of margins, but ultimately, there's a saying in tennis, isn't they? Just too good, and that's what Chelsea ultimately are compared to this version of Djurgården, really. So 3-1, 4-1 down going into the second leg. If they turn this one around, bloody hell, it would be the most incredible comeback ever, wouldn't it? That it's done, isn't it? That tie, really. But one thing I will say, it was good to see the Swedish. Ignore me on that. I got it completely wrong. That I asked them to actually not schedule a game in between the two legs, didn't I? But of course, they had a Stockholm derby. You can't really reschedule a Stockholm derby very easily, can you? So I'll let the authorities off for that. But I do wish. I think the Swedish FA need to look at this, especially when the teams are in the European qualifiers later in the season. Give your teams the best possible chance overall.
Well, I mean, you do say that, but to be fair, the noises coming out of the diff camp are very positive. We'll talk about the Stockholm derby in part 2. But the noises are positive. And, Yanni Honkavara, the manager's come out and said, listen, we're going to give it our all. We still think we're in this tie. Marcus Danielsson said we're going to go out and do what we can. And they've given the example of the Legue Warsaw game. Obviously, Chelsea were well up in that game, weren't they? And they lost at home to Legue Warsaw. So, there's a possibility Diff could maybe come away with a draw, maybe try and sneak a win in the same way Legue Warsaw did. But let's be realistic, getting 3 goals back would be, like you say, it would be one of the probably greatest upsets in the history of European football, certainly the Conference League history. And it does feel this competition, Steve, I do agree with you that there's basically 2 teams that could stop Chelsea, really, and they haven't had to face either of them all the way until the final, really, isn't it? And it'll be one of them, Betis or Fiorentina, maybe, that could give Chelsea a problem. I still think either of them could beat Chelsea, potentially, on their day. But it will come down to factors would have to probably go in their favour. There was a few other interesting comments. I thought it was quite interesting. Mark Cucurella came out and said he praised Tobias Gullikson, said he's a very good player, he thinks he's a very good player. And there was, nice words, and it seems like the game went well in front of quite a good atmosphere. The level is very, very different, isn't it? I mean, and we're talking here like, it's funny, isn't it, Steve? Because if it was like Brentford against Djurgården, do you know what I mean? If Brentford got into the Conference League or Bournemouth, it might be a more even tie. But like you've said with Chelsea there, I mean, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? When you're bringing on Palmer, you're bringing on like 60, 70 million pound players off the bench at half time. I mean, what chance have Diff got, really? So we'll move on from that one quite quickly. Good luck to Diff in the second leg. Of course, it will be a fantastic occasion for their fans at Stamford Bridge. But let's get cracking, Steve, into domestic matters. Because it's been a while, to be fair. I don't think we've even really talked much about domestic matters this season so far. But as always in Norway, games are sort of coming thick and fast. There's been some double game weeks. And we'll start you off, Steve, with... let's start at the top. Because it's hard to say how many games have been played because every team has played basically a different amount of games, which always complicates things, I think, in Norway. But we currently have the top of the table, Brann. After 6 games, they've got 15 points. Vikings, 7 games, 14 points. And Rosenborg, 6 games, 14 points. Glimt, only 4 games played, but they've got 10 points in 4th. To start with this conversation, what's been your general analysis of the opening weeks in Eliteserien that you've seen?
It's been good. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it, what I've seen. And, from what, look at the current top 4 in the table. I think I've got all those teams pretty right. Brann, at the moment, are probably doing a little bit better than I thought. I mean, Brann and Viking it's quite clear what their main strength is. It's scoring goals. They've got a lot of goals in their team. Not many clean sheets. But the key for their success this season is going to be outscoring sides, I think, for Brann Viking. And then you've got your likes of Glimt and Rosenborg, who are a little bit more controlled, not conceding many goals. Rosenborg especially, quite impressed with how they're controlling games this season. I still think that all 4 of them especially Bran, because we think they're going to be involved in a lot of qualifying matches in Europe, could struggle in around July, August time. But we're still a long way away from that. Right now, it's going to be an interesting run-in for the next couple of months, 2.5 months really, and see who's ahead around the sort of the 18, 19 game mark. Of the big teams, the one so far I'm really worried about is Molde, who we might talk about at some point here. But it's been really good stuff. I've enjoyed the league. There's been a mixture of teams as usual. Some high-scoring teams, some good defences, some young talents on show, and it's not been boring. I'll say that.
Not been boring, indeed. We'll kick things off, Steve. I mean, you've given a bit of a brief overview there, but the first team you've kind of highlighted to talk about this season is Rosenborg, funnily enough. Of course, we had their technical director, exclusive interview, Per Jarle Dallum, a few episodes ago, Steve, in pre-season. And you're quite sort of satisfied with the way things are going over at Rosenborg.
I really like what I'm seeing from them. Do you know what? I actually think they might get second place this season. I just like the control they're having in the games. I feel like last season there was too much of a frantic element from them. I like the setup. They've got some defenders that are playing really well at the minute. Nemsik, especially, I think stands out. I really like what he does at the back for them. The goalkeeper, Tanvik, is making some good saves. The entire back four just looks settled. Pereira, Nemsik, Seider, and Raitan. And then, of course, we know they've got two fantastic young talents in Sverre Nipan and Marius Broholm. Those two young lads are absolute starlets. And the other sider, Emil Konradsen, signed back, of course, at the club. Came back midway through last season or in the autumn. Yeah, he started out quite strongly as well. They should have more points on the board. Just if anyone who an incredible game was Rosenborg against Kristiansund. Kristiansund got reduced to 10 men. Kristiansund, as usual, have been an absolute utter annoying bastards, really, for want of a better word. This team just have an incredible knack of getting points. But the stats for the game, Rosenborg 1, Kristiansund 1. 25 shots to 2. Rosenborg led 1-0 for quite a while in the second half and then got done by a 99th minute penalty. So they will be devastated to have dropped 2 points in that game. Could be important if they want to win leagues or even finish in the top 2. You cannot be dropping points like that. But I think the only criticism we can have is probably Islamovic up front. He hasn't taken enough chances, Jonathan. Dino Islamovic is really underperforming his expected goals. So if they actually had a striker who had been taking his chances, you would possibly say Rosenborg would be 100% right now. 6 out of 6 wins. But the defence looks really strong. I'm really impressed with the defence right at the moment.
How is Sverre Nipan getting on? Because there's been a lot of rumours linking him with Aston Villa most recently. Talk to us a little bit about his progress in that Rosenborg team and how crucial has he been to the team.
Yeah, really important. I think he's had a couple of goals this season. I do actually think Broholm has outshone him. I've got to be honest. I think maybe because Broholm gets in more attacking positions, and that's the way football is, isn't it? Right? The attackers always get the limelight at the end of the day, the glory. Nipan's minutes have been a bit reduced at times. I think there was a couple of times he didn't start. Yeah, clearly there's a plan in place. They want to protect the lad, which is really important. But in general, he's been doing what we expected of him. A couple of good performances, probably more to come in the tank as well.
Yeah, and let's just run through the week. Like you said, Glimt didn't have a game because they're preparing for Europe. But if we just run through the most recent round, obviously, Steve, there's been a lot of double game weeks, hasn't there? Which is why there's such an uneven sort of number of games played for every team. But of the most recent round, we had Thursday, the 1st of May. Depends how you define it. I mean, technically round 18.
Mate, incredible. Sorry for disturbing, but it's you talk about rounds. It's just absolute ad hoc. Play whenever you want, right? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I've got written here, round 18 took place on the 30th of April, so I don't know how that's happened. Round 17 took place the next day. So I don't know what's going on here, but I'll read the last week's results anyway. Viking 5, Haugesund 1, Rosenborg 1, Christiansen 1, my boys. Giving your bloody nose again, Steve. I heard you insulting them there. Come on, the KBK. Giving you more to think about than ever. On the Friday, 2nd of May, HamKam 0, K from Oslo 0. Vålerenga 2, Brann 4 to take Brann top of the league, of course, as we said. Hegebo, 96-minute penalty, and Sander in the 81st minute to win it for Brann. On the Sunday, 4th of May, Molde 2, Haugesund 1, another defeat for the Haug. My boys again, Christiansen getting 2-1 away win at Stroms Godset, which isn't the easiest place to go, is it? Logie Thomason on the score sheet there. Tromsø 0, Sandefjord 1, Viking 0, Sarpsborg 0, and then Rosenborg 3 against the Farmers, the Tractor Boys, Bryn, who we've got to sort of give a brief mention to in terms of the Man of the Match award, Steve, that went viral, that carton of eggs given to the Man of the Match. What was it? 3 cartons of eggs. That is the official Man of the Match prize at Bryn, which is unbelievable, really. I wouldn't mind winning the Man of the Match, to be fair. Could whip up a few omelettes. But what's your assessment? Obviously, eggs aside, Steve. What's your assessment of the most recent round of games? Because we've got actually a few listener questions, and I'll ask you one of them now. Why not? It's from a big fan of the show, or big listener, big in name and size. Big Sig 5. He says, "What is going wrong at Molde / Haugesund?" So thank you, Big Sig. Good to hear from you as always, loyal listener. Steve, what's your take on Big Sig's questions there, and just the week in general, the most recent game week?
Well, he always has some good questions because, I think these actually are the 2 teams I'm very, very worried about. If you had to ask me, Jonathan, 2 teams that I'm, got a bit of a bad feeling about right now, it would be Molde and Haugesund for different reasons. Listen, we know Haugesund. Where did I predict them pre-season? 15th, I think. The same applies. The squad's poor. I don't really think they're heading anywhere. It's no real surprise to me to see them struggling. But if we talk about them in isolation, they're making far too many individual mistakes. They're generally lacking a massive goal threat. They've only netted a couple of goals, 2 or 3 goals is it, I think. And there's an air of desperation about Haugesund, I feel. When things start to go bad, they can go really bad. I mean, they got really badly beaten 5-1 by Viking. Viking had 35 shots in that game. And there was a red card right on half-time for Krusnell for a handball, which, I mean, that set them up for the second half really badly. But the manager, for me, he's very frantic. Sanjeev Manoran. We know he did really, credit to him for keeping him up last season. But whenever I see this guy on the touchline, he seems really a bit elements of like Mikel Arteta sometimes, It gets a bit too much, I think. The managers do that as well. They wear their heart on their sleeves, but feels a bit desperate at times. Keep you cool. I want to see more Sven-Goran Erikssons in that situation. Rather than, I just think there's a time and a place for raw emotion. I just think I would much rather see my manager just being a little bit more calm and cool and collected. So I think I just sense that whole thing. I can imagine the dressing room is a bit shouty at times, motivational, trying to inspire players that way, which is great. But it's a bit of a problem. They're obviously winless. They've got 1 point on the board, which was a 0-0 against Fredrikstad. They just lost to Molde 2-1, which nearly should have been a draw, really. I actually expect him to get beaten heavily by Molde. So to get nearly a draw, fair enough. But that kind of highlights what Molde's problems are, which, I'll come on to soon. At this point in time, I don't see how Haugesund avoid relegation unless a couple of other teams just become shambolically bad, which, you'd be looking at the likes of Bryn just on lack of quality, or maybe someone like HamKam. But that would be more hopeful thinking, really. Haugesund just they're not offering much to me at the moment, Jonathan. I'm really worried about them.
Yeah, and just looking into the data there as well, Steve, with our partners, Y-Scout, of course, we've got to thank Y-Scout for our connection with them as well. The partnership's extended, Steve, into another year. It's going from strength to strength, my friend. with Wyscout. Just looking at their expected goals table for Eliteserien, and yeah, they do have Haugesund rock bottom of the league, 3.33 xG with 3 goals scored. Next up is K from Oslo on 4.15 xG, and then Fredrikstad. Obviously, the caveat here is everyone's played a different number of games. But Brynner, it's good to see Bryn sort of just near to mid-table in terms of expected goals. So they're, a team that everyone is sort of expecting to go straight back down. They are creating chances at least for want of, not for the want of trying. And right at the top, Steve Viking, absolutely flying in terms of goals. 18.08 xG, 21 goals scored according to our partners Wyscout. So Viking doing quite well there. Stephen, just a quick question on Haugs, and I noticed they're playing sort of a sort of Ruben Amorim type system, kind of 3-5-2-ish, 3-5-3-4-3, or however you want to call it. Do you think the system change is something that they could need, or is it more about personnel?
Well, they have already changed the system. They started the season 4-3-3. They matched up sort of the Amorim way against Fredrikstad, which I wasn't sure at the time whether that was specifically just for the game, to match up against a side with that sort of formation. Against Molde, I think they kept the same system or 2 up front. I think it was. So that already shows that he's trying to make some changes, but does he know whether to stick or twist? Does he know what his best system is? Does he know what his best 11 is? I look at that 11 that's just started against Molde. Not a lot excites me about the team. I think, he is, I've criticised the manager a little bit there for his emotions and stuff, but what's he got to work with, really? Would me or you do a better job than him? Probably not. The squad's not great, is it? Or it's full of, there's players in there, I've said before, that I think have got injury concerns down the years who you got to wrap them in cotton wool a little bit. Yeah, look, I'm sorry, any Haugesund fans here. I am. I'm trying to find some positives. It wouldn't be a simple case of just get rid of the manager and then suddenly start playing better. The whole club needs to look at everything going into the summer and decide where the hell we're going to go with this project.
Yeah, I mean, Bruno Leite, 30-year-old captain there as well. He's still knocking about, like you said in the preseason show. He was my man, but he was my man in about 2019. So that kind of sums it all up. Really, he's now pushing 30. Steve, let's get to big six question about Molde, because they've got Per-Mathias Hogmo. I noticed that at the weekend, Jalal Abdullahi, who's I think on loan from Elfsborg. I don't think that's a permanent deal, if I'm right in saying. He got his first goal for the club in Eliteserien anyway of the season, which it did surprise me a little bit that Elfsborg let him go on loan. To be fair, I thought he looked decent at times. They've pulled out that 2-1 win there, but it sounds like yourself and Big Sig are both not really convinced with what you've seen so far from Molde.
Yeah, because that's a game they should be winning very, very comfortably. If anyone who saw Viking Haugesund, there was night and day. Viking could have won that game 7 or 8-1. And, Haugesund have only just had a 3-day rest, 4-day rest from that game. It was a great spot. It was a really good chance for Molde to get their season started. They hadn't won a game before this one. They'd had some tough fixtures, to be fair, to Molde. And I'll give them credit. They ground out a tough 0-0 at Rosenborg the week before, where the manager, Hogmo, basically went very pragmatic. Sometimes you just got to do that to get a result, right? So I was feeling more confident about them, but they really laboured to the win here. They got a 1-0. They were 1-0 up at half time, and just felt in the second half maybe they just needed the win, right? Sometimes a team needs a win. But they could have maybe got a second goal on occasion. But whilst the match ends 1-0, anyone's still in the game. They let Haugesund linger. It looked like they were going to get that point, the 1-1 draw. And then there was that even later goal from Abdullahi. And the 3 points should do them good, Molde. But let's be honest, the quality they have compared to Haugesund and also the scheduling spot, they should be winning that night and day with goals to spare, at least by 2-goal margin, possibly 3-goal margin. And something's just not right here. I think they're getting used to the new manager system. I don't think they've got the players for how he wants them to play, which means they're going to really have to dip heavily into this transfer market in the summer, and not just bring players in. They're going to have to get rid of a few. I think, who are just not going to suit. Because there's too many players that don't suit Per Mertesaeus Hogmo's system, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's a work in progress, isn't it? It's only a few games into the season. You described the management duo there, assistant manager as well. I think they got quite a high-profile assistant manager. Am I right in saying you described it as Pep and like having Pep and Mourinho on the touchline? So surely things are going to turn around on that front. Steve, before we move on, obviously we've got one question about Viking. You just written here goals, 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 basically. So let's get into them. What's going right for them at the moment? Is it just Trippic effect?
Yeah, I mean, Trippic reminds me of what Pellegrino was at Bodø Glimt. There's an argument to say he's not the best player in the league. I think Patrick Berg's the best player in the league. I said Patrick Berg's the best player in Scandinavia right now. But Trippic, for what he means to his team, he's probably the MVP of the league, for his team anyway, because he means so much to them. I mean, I think there's an injury doubt with him now, but some of his returns have been exceptional. He's just the complete talisman in the offense. He's the captain. He leads by example. Technically brilliant. Positionally, he's always in the right spot. You can tell he leads the team. But apart from that, have you ever sort of watched a team before? And there's not many examples of this. You feel like the entire 11 could score a goal. Do you know where I'm coming from? And there's teams the opposite of that, like Brentford in the Premier League. Like the same 3 or 4 players always score for Brentford, right? But with Viking, like it feels like the whole 11 can score. I mean, they've got 4. The back 4 is one of the tallest back 4s you'll see. So immediately from set piece, they are a massive set piece threat because they can send these big bodies forward and have covering players with pace. So they've scored quite a lot of set piece goals. Hegheim has scored quite a few, but I think the whole back 4 is probably netted. The only real problem is that at the minute they need a number 9 to nail down the spot and score goals. Christensen scored. Even he's not had a bad start to the season, though, to be fair. Peter Christensen. Be interesting to see whether, D'Agostino, although I think he's out until the summer now with another injury, Mikkelsen might maybe get going at some point as well. But yeah, just the entire goal-scoring threat of the team really impresses me. Ironically, they had a 0-0 draw against Salzburg at the weekend. I never saw that coming. I thought that would be something like 4-3. So I don't really know what happened there. But I think I didn't actually watch the game live. I watched some of the highlights. It might have been a clash of styles where sometimes when you get 2 really offensive teams together, it doesn't always result in goals, weirdly, because they just cancel each other out. So that was a weird one. But it's not. You won't see many Viking clean sheets this season, but you'll see them score a lot of goals.
Good summary. When you said that, the Brentford team is doing quite well, isn't it? In terms of, I think they're the only team in the Premier League with 3 goal scorers who've got 10 more than 10 each, or 10 each. Before we wrap up part 1, Steve, we're going to leave it there, I think, for Norway. Just 2 questions for you, short answers maybe. Outside of the teams we've discussed so far, who's the biggest team in your radar to talk about in the next coming weeks? Could be for being good or for being bad, or just name one team maybe briefly on your radar. And who has been the best player in the league so far, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think 2 teams that are on my radar.
And you can't say Patrick Berg, of course, obviously, because we get it.
I think 2 teams on my radar to talk about. Tromsø not a really had a worrying start. I thought they'd be quite good. So I'm a bit concerned about them. But Sandefjord definitely will need further discussion. This is probably the best looking Sandefjord side I've ever seen in Eliteserien. And they're playing some good football around it. So that I think we have to really dedicate a bit of time to Sandefjord, whatever the results are in the next couple of rounds, to really dissect what's going on there. Best player, I mean, it's been Trippic, hasn't it? But I do like what that defender, I mean, Nemcic at Rosenborg, I think he's had a really, really strong start to the season, along with the goalkeeper there, Tangvik.
And that'll do for me, but Steve, we've got a couple of more listener questions. So we've got Can't Ignore Team Overs, big loyal fan of the podcast, absolute legend at Here for Football. He says, do you think Knutsen will move on after this season? I feel like he might want a new challenge soon. He sounded a bit frustrated, didn't he, in that interview at the top of the show that we quoted from. And Steve, I just want to, I think appears to be maybe a new listener, or someone I've not seen anywhere ask questions before. Nick Mace 5. He just says, can Glimt put together a masterclass and shock Spurs to move on to the final? So I thought I'd give him a shout out there. Mesa 66, thanks for your question. So Steve, could you just touch on those two questions quickly before we move on to part 2?
Mesa 66. He's in the betting world. I've interacted with him a few times, and definitely they can put together a masterclass and shock Spurs. I've said I think that they can win the second leg. By how many goals, I'm not sure. And then going back to team overs. Thanks very much again for your question with Knutsen. I mean, this has been asked a lot of times, hasn't it? I don't know anymore. He wants to get into the Champions League group stage. That's the burning ambition for Knutsen, but he's not. He's getting on a bit, He's no spring chicken anymore. I think Knutsen's about 54 off the top of my head. I might be wrong there, but I feel like at some stage it's going to be now or never soon, with Kjetil Knutsen. But look, we know he was on Tony Bloom's shortlist at Brighton, second choice. So, there will be teams definitely on his radar, perhaps, but I don't see him leaving in the summer. At the end of the season is more likely. Maybe he could come in and do a firefighting job somewhere at a big club in Europe if he fancies it around about January. So, I mean, look at what Ari Haaland moved to St Etienne, didn't he? Knutsen would demand a bigger job than that. But that's the sort of move maybe that you could see happening, perhaps, if he's taken Glimt to the Champions League group stage. But I suppose it would maybe depend how they're doing in that group stage. If they had a chance to qualify for the knockout playoff round, I think he would want to stay. It's difficult, isn't it? It seems really hard for Kjetil Knutsen to get out of the cycle of the Glimt in terms of where the league campaign is in contrast to the European campaign.
That'll do then. That will do for part 1. Thank you, Steve. In part 2, we're going to come to talk about Sweden. There's been a lot going on besides Djurgården and their incredible run to the last 4 of Europe. So stay tuned and get yourself a biscuit, and we'll be back after this short break.
Welcome back to the Nordic Football Podcast, and the Allsvenskan has now completed 7 rounds. Incredibly, we are nearly 25% of the season underway, and the table has a very interesting look. We actually have a team on 0 points, sadly. Värnamo are rather struggling down there at the bottom, but top of the table, a rather sensational looking team here, which, I'm delighted to see this, I must say, and hats off to the work that's been going on here. But we have 2 teams on 17 points each, and on goal difference, a certain Mjällby lead the pack in the Allsvenskan. How big a shock is this to you, Jonathan?
Well, it's a shock because of the other teams, I suppose. So when you look at it from that point of view, of course, Mjällby topping Allsvenskan is incredible. It's uncharted territory, of course. They've had good runs in the past, but after such a long period of the season so far, 7 games is a decent chunk of the season. To be fair, you're nearly approaching sort of 25% or so, roughly. So, it's amazing. But if you actually look at them as a team, I'm not massively surprised, Steve. I think pound for pound, they are one of the best teams in the league. I mean, I did say it in the pre-season show. I think they'll go well again. I've been up on them for a few seasons now, Steve. And in general, we've both been sort of quite big on Mjällby and their incredible manager, Anders Torstensson, of course, and the achievements he's done there in his 2 spells. But they just keep ticking along, Steve. I mean, they haven't lost. They've conceded 6 goals in 7 games. They've scored 17. And this is the big thing. they've really started to add goals to that team. And the joint top, of course, on point on goal difference with Oyikor, who are also having a really good season, by the way, it should be said, and they're unbeaten as well. The last two unbeaten teams. But this Mealby side, Steve, I think there's an argument that they're here to stay. I mean, I'm not suggesting they're going to win the title. Now that would be something. But they finished fifth last season, Steve, and they're on an upward trajectory. I don't see this being necessarily a flash in the pan. So there's a lot of different factors, and I don't know if you're going to ask me about them, but I'll briefly just touch them. I think they are actually a very good side, Steve, in all different areas. And they've also added a bit more goals to the game, as I've just said. So no, I think there's an argument, Steve, that this is not necessarily a flash in the pan.
Yeah, I was actually talking to someone at my cricket game at the weekend, and then they know that I'm into the Scandinavian leagues. And someone was asking me who's top in Sweden right now, and I said Mjällby. And the answer was I thought that was a player, not a club. So that's not. No one had actually heard of them, in my dressing room. But Big Sig's asked a question here. What is going right at Mjällby? I mean, you've answered some of that already, but let me just go through the top five. Mjällby and AIK on 17 points. Hammarby on 16, Elfsborg on 13, Malmo on 11. They're already 6 points off the pace. Degerfors in the dizzy heights of 6th place, as well as Bromma-Poikana. So several teams on 10 points. And like I said, down the bottom, Varnamo on 0 points there. But what's going right at Mjällby? Is it could be a simple case of, I mentioned in the pre-season preview podcast, I do believe that their transfer business has been incredibly underrated in the recent years. Are we now at a stage where the entire squad's underrated?
Yeah, and of course, thanks for the questions as well. Fantastic stuff. I think we are at the stage, Steve, where I would kind of agree with what you just said there. I think we're at the stage where the recruitment needs to be probably talked about on a higher level now, in terms of, is this maybe one of the best recruitment teams in Sweden? Because traditionally we've talked about sort of Hammarby and their player sale model. They've sort of bought and sold. They've sourced players from Africa, for example. We talked about sort of Malmo and how they do their business and they produce a lot of players from their academy and sell them on. The likes of obviously they've got Hugo Bolin at this moment in time. They've had Nanasi, and over the years I've had plenty of good players. Hugo Larsson that they've sold on. We talked about different player models in different clubs. Sorry, Oyikor and the way they sort of go for maybe a bit more experience. I think we need to start looking at the management team at Mjällby beyond Torstensson and the team that he's actually got around him. We have a follower who Steve is the assistant coach, Carl Marius Axum. I don't know if he listens to this, but I'd quite like to get him on the show because I'm interested in maybe what he might have to say. I think they've got a sporting director as well, who we've talked about once or twice on this podcast, and I've seen one or two of their recruitment guys just in general on social media. So it might be time soon, Steve, to maybe widen out our network on Mjällby and just dig into what's going on here. But yeah, if you look at the squad, I mean, like you've touched on there, they've lost players in the winter, but they've replaced them well. Axel Noren's come in. They've obviously lost Colin Roslow, who's gone to Malmo. He's not having the best of times at Malmo, to be fair, but we'll come on to them. They've replaced the Axel Noren from Gais. He's come in and just been absolutely rock solid. Really good signing he looks so far. Abdullah Iqbal. Not many Pakistani players, Steve, are there in football in general. He's come in and he's started to look really good this season. He was playing at B93 in Denmark, and he's started to get more and more game time. Everyone talked about at the start of the season, Steve, Elliott Stroud. We talked about fantasy, and everyone having him in their fantasy team. You look at the wing-back system that they play, they've got Stroud, but they've also got Herman Johansson on the opposite side now. It's not just Stroud who's a danger. Herman Johansson's been fantastic this start of the season. 4 goals, Steve, in 7 games. He's come through and emerged really well. So they've now got a threat on both sides. You've got Nicholas Rockja, Steve, who they've signed for a Danish player who's really doing well as well this season. They've sort of tapped that Danish market that a lot of Swedish clubs have looked at, lower leagues of Denmark, for a couple of players. And then they've got likes of Jesper Gustafsson, who was just rock solid in midfield. But it's sprinkled with a bit of stardust, Steve. I think Tornqvist as well, by the way, he's got an argument to be one of the best keepers in Sweden. And then you've got up front, Steve. They've revealed maybe a potential jewel in their crown, Abdoulaye Mane. Now I know you actually suggested off air before we start recording that we should maybe name this episode after him, which would have been probably apt in any other week if it wasn't for 2 European semi-finals. But he definitely deserves a mention, Steve, because as you said, he got a hat-trick in his not the most recent game, but in the last match that Mjällby had against Degerfors. He pulled up a hat-trick in a 4-1 win. They just beaten IFK Göteborg 1-0 as well, and they were pretty solid in that game. He's come up and scored quite a few goals, and yeah, the recruitment has been on point, to coin a phrase. And I think if you look at their kind of next few games, we're going to start to see real tests, because the only maybe thing you could say about them is the only really, really tough game you could maybe argue they've had is, well, you could say Elfsborg away and Hammarby obviously at home, but they beat Hammarby. But they're now going to have quite a tough run. The next game's at AIK away, then they've got Djurgården away, then they've got Brommapojkarna at home, and then Hammarby away. So they have got a rough spell of fixtures coming up. But if they can get past those 4 games and come out of it in sort of, in a healthy shape, you could say that they've got a real strong argument to maybe go for Europe.
Yeah, I mean, these two wingbacks, Johansson, Stroud, they're goal scoring machines, assist machines. Obviously, defensively strong as well. This Rokia has been an incredible addition. Mane, he's not actually the highest scorer in the league. I think it's Nyman at Norrköping. But I mean, incredible stuff. I guess the question is, where can they finish from here? Where do you predict that Mjällby will end up? Could they even be a dark horse for the title?
I think for the title, no. I think they will have an inevitable dip at some point, and that could come in the next 4 games. To be fair, I think we'll have a much stronger idea of them at the end of May. That's the way I'm looking at it. Can they get through the next 2 away games? But the thing with Mjällby is they are good away from home, Steve. They do. Anders Torstensson does relish playing against these big teams, so they won't go to AIK or Djurgården in those Stockholm games and feel any kind of inferiority complex. That's for sure. They'll definitely go into it with a game plan. But AIK have started the season really strong. This is going to be quite a good game, actually. I think this is going to be a hard one to predict. And Djurgården at home are always quite strong. So I think the next 2 games will really tell us about them. My worry about them is in the summer, maybe, because I think that Elliot Stroud is going to have a lot of interest. I think that the way Mjällby's finances are, that Mane could even, if he continues in this way, he might end up at Southampton or something like Sadio. There's a chance that he could get a move quite quickly. I think Bjork Bang Kittelsen, we talked about curious names, didn't we, in the preseason podcast? And he's actually looked decent, to be fair. He's not been too bad. He's played 6 games and he's got 1 or 2 assists come from odd. He's looked decent as well. So yeah, I really think that they can hang in there for maybe top 4. Maybe go one better than they did last season in 5th. They could look for a place on the podium, Steve. I think Hammarby, Malmo, and AIK would have something to say about that. But I think they could maybe challenge for the podium. But I think title is a bit early to say. But listen, if they go to AIK and win, we will really have to have a serious talk about them.
Yeah, I want to have a little bit of a talk about AIK and Hammarby in a minute. But I suppose the other really big sort of talking point at the moment is the form of the defending champions Malmo. And Spoonsy does ask, what is going on with Malmo? 1 win in 5 and they're 6 points off first. Will they even win the league this year? And this is unusual for them. They normally are out of the traps very, very quickly under Henrik Rydstrom in all of the seasons that he's been in charge. This is the first time they're not going really, 7 games in, just 11 points. They've got a European qualifying run to come in the summer. This feels to me already like a year when they might not actually win the title if they're not careful. The big problem in Sweden's always been, can a team actually, eclipse them? Because often there's too many teams below par. But Malmo, what is going wrong there? We certainly expected them to be a bit higher than they are at the moment.
Yeah, and this is an interesting one because I think it's literally a case of everything that we've praised Malmo for. There's always the gift and the curse, isn't there, Steve? There's always a good side of the coin and a bad side of the coin. There's always the dark side and the light side, Steve, isn't there? There's always the angel and the devil. And for all the praise we've given Malmo, over the last sort of year or so. I mean, I remember writing a Y Scout blog about how good they are in their system and how they tilt the pitch and they play from side to side. For all the praise of that, Steve, there is a flip side to it, and I think that's what they've been caught up on this season. A bit too laboured, bit too slow. Maybe you could argue this season. Maybe teams have found them out a little bit more. The squad is just, the gift and the curse. I said it. The squad is stacked, but that can be a problem because the team selection is all over the place. I don't know what you can't predict the Malmo lineup at this moment in time. It's impossible. They have had injuries, to be fair to them. They've got some longer term injuries, but they've also had sort of minor injuries, Steve. You've got the likes of Sigurdsson hasn't really sort of got his fitness yet. He was a big signing. Haksabanovic hasn't really got into rhythm yet. Anders Christensen is at that age now where he just picks up injuries like a kid picks up sweets in a candy store, to be honest. Every game he seems to sort of have a few. Pontus Jansson, he's got a few problems, I think knee problems. So that's your spine of your team almost. Is kind of not reliable necessarily with injuries, which is unfortunate. But yeah, they've taken a beating at home to Brommapojkarna this evening, which is a massive, stunning result, really. And it's a bit of a trend. They haven't really been looking great in any game this season, to be honest. So yeah, there is, to answer the question from the listener question, there is some worries. Even against Osters, who they beat 2-0, the relegation candidates, they didn't look amazing. And like I say, obviously Hammarby have beaten them, and that was the big 6-pointer really at the top of the table. And Hammarby beat them 2-0. And I just think that whilst they could switch it around, they are still a top team, Malmo. Fans are starting to get a little bit frustrated, and I think there's a sort of a bit of a backstory here, Steve, where I wouldn't say there's pressure on Rydström, but I do think that the European run is going to be crucial. I think Malmo fans are. I genuinely do think there's a bit of envy towards Diff. The run they've gone on, because Malmo, they look at themselves as Sweden's number one, and they're not in the spotlight at the moment. And I just think that's. I just think their European run has sort of just upset fans a little bit, and I think that's just carried on into the season. And that dissent has sort of grown a bit more now, and I think there's people starting to question Rydström a little bit more now. And I think there's a bit of a snowball here building, Steve, where it is looking like something that could become a bit more of a worry as the weeks go on.
Yeah, I actually watched that game against Brommapojkarna, and I mean, the problem is the squad. You're right, you don't know what 11 it's going to be. There's no consistency. In terms of tactics, it's listed as 4-4-2, isn't it? But whenever I see Malmo, I feel like sometimes Rydström's trying to overplay the game, make the game too complicated. He overcomplicates it a bit too much. Maybe just simplify it again. I mean, Tahar Ali, I think he's I really want your opinion on Tahar Ali, because at times I watch him and I think this guy is incredible, technically brilliant. He scored 1 goal in his last 35 Allsvenskan games. That's nowhere near enough of a return for a player of his technical ability. I can't decide whether he's a complete busted flush or he's too good for the players around him. Incredible player, but then it's like a conveyor belt up front. Botheim, isn't it? And Keys are telling. He's suddenly Oliver Berg's been back in the fray. I feel like Oliver Berg maybe knocked on his door and said, "I want to start games." He started the last 2 games. He's done absolutely nothing. Missed a good chance tonight. I think he can't keep all these players happy, Jonathan. There's no consistency with the 11. I think it's starting to bite them in the ass a bit.
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking about Tahar Ali, I think you're being harsh there. I mean, I think he was their best player probably on this occasion. He got the assist for the goal to get them back into it, narrow the deficit at 2-1. If you look at this season, Steve, I mean, this is the first time he's played 90 minutes. And this is part of the problem. You can't get rhythm if you're not getting opportunities, Steve. He played 82 against Diff. That's the last time he's played more than 80 minutes. He then got 24 minutes against Elfsborg in the opening game. Got 73 against Oikor. Got 30 minutes against Sirius. 69 against Hammarby and 23 against Osters. So when you're asking about him, I think he is probably the best 1v1 dribbler in the league. To be honest, I would have expected him to probably have left by now, really. But he doesn't get the run of games probably that he needs, and I think that is one of the problems at Malmo at the moment. It's too unpredictable, really. His lineup's too unpredictable. I think that can affect relationships within the team itself, because you need to build relationships. Malmo's team last season was so good at the start of the season because they had relationships. They had Nanasi and Bussanello down the left interchanging, and getting crosses in and getting inside, cutting inside. They had players that you could kind of play off each other. At the moment, they don't have those relationships. I mean, Botheim, some people are starting to say in Sweden he's a bit of a busted flush. Some of the Malmo fans on Twitter have been saying he's a bit of a flop. But he still seems to start ahead of Kiese Tellin, who banged goals in for fun last season. So they rotate. Like you said, Oliver Berg comes in and doesn't have a huge impact. Haksabanovic came in. Sigurdsson, he got a goal here and there when he first sort of started, but he doesn't look fit. No one's really on peak form right now, and I think the thing is, Steve, that it's a bit like what you just said. In any other season, you could probably get away with this. Malmo probably, and they still might get away with it, Malmo, and it's still early days. But if you look at the table already, they're already 6 points behind the top two. And I think more worrying than that is they're 5 points behind Hammarby. And in a short season, that is quite a big points gap. So I know that there's going to be European football for both of them. But 5 points is, and when you've already lost to them as well, that is the gap starting to open up a bit. So they're running out of leg room to really. I think there will be a title race this season, Steve, because I don't think Hammarby are going away. And the way Oikor are looking at this moment in time, they look focused. So Malmo need to sort of pull out their britches, Steve, and get to work.
Yeah, just before we move on from Malmo, you touched on it when we were talking about Mjällby. I think there's a little bit of a problem in defence because they really missed Pontus Jansson in recent games through an injury. You mentioned Rosler's not looked that great. I thought the opening goal for Bromma Poikina, the big lad for them, I forgot what his name is, took his goal really well, but he bullied Niels Zatterstrom, the young lad. Really bullied him off the ball. Rosler there, how do you think he started? Pontus Jansson, when he doesn't play, that's a big player for them, isn't it? Not just in terms of his experience, but the whole leadership thing.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Pontus Jansson is the beating heart of Malmo, Steve. He embodies the club. He's a club legend. He's a fan. He's everything that Malmo embody, really. And listen, we talked about Mjällby just now in their recruitment. There are people sort of criticising Rosler at Malmo at the moment, saying, who's this dud that we've got from Mjällby? And maybe Mjällby have got done a number on us, yeah, because they've just brought in, like I say, Axel Noah from Guys, and he's looking much better. Zetterstrom's a young talent, he's got years ahead of him. He needs to probably improve his game, but it's part of that, isn't it, Steve? I think when you're bringing through young players, you can rest them at times, but I think the rotation system doesn't work. I think they're going to have a real think about their business in the summer, because I think they'll still probably be active in the summer, but they've got too many players, Steve, I think, just never quite made it. You know what I mean? Like Berg, like Haksabanovic, just always have been touted as being really good, but just never quite made it at the top. If you look at Berg as a good example, he did it at Kalmar, right, when he's the main man every week starting as the false nine, and I think he's almost better as a big fish in a smaller pond. Went to Diff, didn't work out. Went to Malmo, in and out of the team. I think you either need to start him every week and you take what you can get from him, or you don't have him. Haksabanovic, I think, is similar. You either play him every week or you don't. And obviously these niggly injuries don't help, but I think they've got a lot of players, Steve, and they're not really rotation players. Taha Ali's a great example, like you've just said there. Imagine if he was at Hammarby, Steve. He'd probably have left the league by now. Do you know what I mean? Because he will be playing every single week, and you get that rhythm that's sort of like Basumana Traore. I know you criticised him last season, but when he's playing every single week and gets the rhythm, Ali doesn't get that, and he's often used as an impact sub. And I think that's harsh on a player who's so good 1v1. So yeah, I think Janssen is key. He needs to come back, but when you've signed veterans, Steve, you get veteran legs. You said your legs are aching this morning from the cricket, so you know exactly what those aching bones are like when you've been doing it for a few years. So Pontus is probably a bit similar. Christensen's similar. They're not players who can play week in, week out. I think the Botheim situation needs to be resolved. Some of the signings, haven't really done a huge amount, as I just mentioned. So there's a lot of work for Malmo, really. And I think in a way, it's good for the league. I think it's good for Rydström as well, because I think if he's going to move on and get a bigger job, this is an interesting test for him, Steve. He can't fail this test, to be fair. Do you know what I mean? Everyone's touted him as this big next manager. Is he going to end up in the Premier League, etc.? He needs to sort this out, really. And an accusation against him in the last few years has been, oh, well, it's too easy for you. you've got all the resources and you're at the best club. So it's a bit like, Pep at Man City. People used to say that, didn't they? Oh, it's just easy for you. So he's in a similar situation to Pep now. It's like you've got to find answers now. Are you really the top dog? So I actually think that this will be a good challenge for him against what is a good Hammarby side, in my opinion, and also Oiko are really looking quite solid. And also, Steve, I think Diff are going to improve once they're out of Europe. I don't think they're going to go in. And if Mjällby sort of put a run together as well, we could have quite an exciting title race.
Do you know, you've actually convinced me with Tahar Ali. I think he's really good, I couldn't make my mind up, but I think there's definitely a player there. And I think you hit the nail on the head. He needs to be playing 80 plus minutes every week. And you would see, you can't touch him one-on-one, like you said. I think it's the other players are not performing well enough around him to get in positions. He's almost ahead of them. So, you convinced me on that. One of the big problems I think Malmo have got, I've said it before, I think there's a lot of really good managers in this league right now. All the teams above them in the table have got really good managers. You mentioned Djurgården as well. They might improve. Hammarby, AIK, Elfsborg, obviously, in the top four. Hammarby especially. This feels to me, I know their manager was linked with Swansea. If they can keep this manager for the whole season, Hammarby look well placed for once, don't they, to win this Allsvenskan, Jonathan, because they're possibly playing maybe the best football out all the teams up there, and they've got a squad of really good players.
Yeah, I think right now, pound for pound, they're the best team in the league. And you talk about Tahar Ali. I think he'd be in the contention for like player of the season if he was at Hammarby. I think Hammarby is almost the perfect move for him, to be honest. He's at that age now. Is he actually gonna get the big European move? He's still young enough to get a big move, but he might not be appealing to say championship clubs. We're going to talk about a big signing in a minute that will interest fans in England, but you could see him making, if he was ever to leave, obviously, I think Hammarby would be a perfect club for him, to be fair. Playing week in, week out, that system, the way they get in behind and get on counter attacks. Things may be a bit too sometimes complicated at Malmo, like the lack of game time he gets and the way they want to play. Maybe, like you say, sometimes you just have to simplify things, Steve, and maybe a bit more simple system would get the best out of him. I think Hammarby are the real deal. I think they're here to stay. I think the only problem is if they get a phone call from Richard Montague at Swansea, maybe, which is the rumour going around at one point anyway, or if they get a phone call from anyone else for their manager, because I think I did say that I thought this might be Rydström's last season in Sweden, but it's starting to look the other way now. It's starting to look like Kim Herberg is not sticking around for long, the way that people are looking at him. Really impressed with them. I think the system and the shape is just really good. They battered Osters, really, Steve. That game was done and dusted by half time almost. I said it on Twitter, and I think Nahir Basara is like the Bruno Fernandes of Sweden. Just clutch really in that sort of 10 position, getting on the end of chances and things like that. He drags the whole team up a level. I think that they've got a decent squad. Youssef Arabi got injured. They brought in Bodø. Like, they've got players who can come in and do a job. Tunekti, I think, has looked good. You didn't say too much about him in pre-season pod when I asked you about him. Obviously, he's been in Norway, but he's looked really good to me so far. Paulus Abraham's not looked amazing, but he got a goal, so that might kickstart him. I think they're the real deal, Steve. I don't think they're going away. So that is why I think the Malmo need to sort their ideas out, because if it goes too long, they could get caught in the trap here and end up out of it before they realise.
Alan Sheehan has been appointed the permanent Swansea boss. Had an incredible run of results. He might have, we know Kim Helberg was strongly linked with Swansea, so maybe Alan Sheehan might have saved. It could just say they win the title. Maybe Alan Sheehan won the title for Hammarby just by getting that job. But Tunekti, I've got to be honest with you. I never really saw a lot there. He was at Bodø Glimt and he didn't really work out there. He wasn't doing good enough. At Haugesund, he was in a poor side, but I never really saw much from him either there. Somehow it seems to have been worked out at Hammarby. I agree with you. I think there's some really good surroundings here maybe at Hammarby at the moment, where coaches are getting players to perform at their absolute best. They've got an incredible talisman, of course, in Basara, another player who reminds me an awful lot of Pellegrino at Glimt, and Trippic at Viking. Very similar player. They just seem to it's a great word, isn't it? Talisman, really, really so important that they keep him fit. But he gets through so many assists, he scores goals, and they're not a club known for winning much silverware, but this could be the year. I mean, right at this point in time, if I offered you two options to win the title, either Malmo or the rest of the field, who are you picking?
It's a good question. I think we'll talk about Oiko in another week. I think they deserve a bit more talk time. But I've been very impressed with them. I think at this point, I'm going to stick with my pre-season prediction, which was Malmo. But it is, I would say right now, it's 52-48. I think Hammarby are going to give them a real tussle. And I think the thing with Malmo, Steve, is there is a time where if they get on a run, no one can match them when they get on a run. And 5 points, 6 points it's not done and dusted. If they can get players back fit and go on a run, Steve, no one can stop Malmo at the end of the day. Do you know what I mean? They're still a powerhouse, but that train is sort of stumbling a little bit. That Formula One engine, it does need a pit stop, and I think that is the thing. Can anyone overtake them right now? I do think there's a few teams that can overtake them, but if you sort of like you said there, if you had given me one or the other right now, I'm still going to say Malmo, but I think it could change in the next 3-4 weeks. I think they're not looking good, Steve. And BP, by the way, credit to BP. I think they've been quite an interesting team this season so far. They've looked pretty decent. I didn't expect them to go to Malmo win, but they've looked like a decent competitor. But even in other games, Steve, Malmo, they've not really played, apart from obviously they played Diff and Hammarby, but Hammarby gave them a bit of a beating in that match. Do you know what I mean? It was pretty comfortable. So I'll say Malmo, but I think this is going to be a genuine title race potentially.
I think the field have got every chance because Malmo usually drop points when they're in Europe. They're normally way ahead by the time they start the European run, so that's not going to happen this year. I mentioned Swansea City there, nearly nicking Hammarby's manager, but they have been nicking players from the league. Clearly, Swansea are doing quite a bit of scouting up in Sweden. There's been a deal, hasn't there, this week? They've taken a player from Häcken.
That's correct. Yep, they've signed Zidane Inusa. It's been announced today, and well, Steve, if only there was someone we'd worked with at Football Radar who was in charge of things at Swansea that we could call up and connect with. There's an interesting story there that maybe we'll reveal one day, but won't do it right now. But yes, it looks like they have got their eyes on this market. Maybe this podcast, who knows, Steve? Yeah, they've dipped into the market, and I think they've got new ownership, Steve. I think they've got some new people in the club. It seems to be obviously Luka Modric. That was the big headline, wasn't it? He's a minor partner. I think he's invested into the club basically, and he's bought a minority stake in Swansea, which is very interesting. Anusa is a player who we talked about a lot. We've written a Wisecat blog on him. We wrote a blog, didn't we, start the season, Steve? Breakout talents, and he was in that list. He's a very good sort of he's a bit like Taha Ali in the sense of a 1v1 dribbler. He's very quick. He will have pace. I think Championship is a league that could potentially suit him, although it's an intense league, isn't it, Stevie? I know you've just won it, so you as a Leeds fan, you'll be in position to tell us all about the Championship. But he's a high energy player, good in 1v1 duels, lots of dribbles, lots of running, lots of take-ons. And I think it's a decent signing, to be fair. And obviously, there's been a lot of interest in him. Saint-Etienne at one point, I think, had him in for a medical, didn't quite go through in France. So I think Swansea have kind of looked at that and gone, we need to get this tied down immediately. The season's barely ended, doesn't it? And they've already announced it. So that tells you that they've obviously had their eye on him for quite a while. And there's another one off to the Championship from Sweden.
Yeah, it's a long season, 46 games. And it'll be interesting to see how he gets on there. I mean, let's talk about the managers, by the way. Marty Cifuentes, of course, QPR came there from Hammarby. I think he's linked with Norwich City now. We know Championship clubs really do look at managers in Scandinavia now. It's a pathway in, isn't it, to English football, European football for them. So don't any given moment if an appointment is made in the Championship now from Sweden, Norway, whatever, I'm not shocked at all, because it's a clear pathway that's going on, that's for sure. What's the record low total for points? I was trying to research this while we're live on air, because Varnamo are pointless after 7 games. So that's very... I'm not actually seeing much of them, I must say, a couple of early games, but worrying times for Kim Hellberg's former club. And, obviously I'm going to try and find what this record total is, but I mean, them and Oster's down at the bottom. We'll talk about this another day. But, where is Varnamo's first point coming from, Jonathan? They have really struggled.
Well, I mean, it could be coming maybe this weekend.
Got Geis.
Possibly.
Then they got Malmo. Then they got Häcken. Actually, Varnamo against Oster in round 11. That's a proper 6-pointer, isn't it? You were actually worried about them pre-season. You said there might be a few players who actually want to perform to get themselves in the shop window. It doesn't really seem like that has happened so far, unfortunately, for Varnamo. I always hate to see a side struggling so badly as that. So I kind of hope they get something on the board soon.
Do you know what? When you have 10 men against Halmstad, when Halmstad have 10 men against you, and you still batter you. They lost 4-2 at the weekend away to Halmstad, and Halmstad went down to 10 men in the 38th minute. That is a massive red flag. Massive red flag. Halmstad, who can't barely score a goal for fun, and they've got 10 men and they're battering you. That is huge alarm bells. Because I said in the pre-season show, Steve, I thought their manager would be their sort of maybe potential shining light. And like you say, I did say, I think that they've got a couple of players who want to put themselves in the shop window, Steve. Well, so far, players putting themselves in the shop window is translated to Wanderson getting sent off and missing a huge amount of games. So basically, he's not been around to basically prove himself. After there was a lot of talk about him going to Hammarby. The management team, they really know him and really like him. And obviously there's been interest to take him to Hammarby because he is of that level potentially. And Kalu, I think you tweeted about it. He missed a sitter, didn't he, the other day? He got on the score sheet just this week gone, but they're the two who are supposed to be playing for the move, Steve, but they've probably been two of their poorer players so far this season. So, or at least reliable anyway. So there's big alarm bells for Varnamo, I think, when you're losing to Halmstad, because Halmstad were the team that were looking poor at the start of the season. But they've managed to sort of get quite a confidence-boosting win at the weekend, 4-2 against Varnamo. So,
yeah, it's an ongoing situation we'll keep our eye on. Obviously, the longer this goes on, the more sort of media attention there'll be. You see it mentioned. If they lose their first 10 games, that's going to start to become rather big news, isn't it? So we'll have to see how it goes with Varnamo. I do hope they get some points on the board soon. But that will be it for this edition of the Nordic Football Podcast. We will have to leave it there. Thank you very much for everyone who listened, who watched, whatever. And send your questions in as well. Thanks very much for that. And if you ever got a question for us, then do get in touch on X or via the email. Any last words, Jonathan, from this episode from you?
No, just to say about Anusa, £5 million is the confirmed transfer fee. Add-ons, it could get to about 5.5-6 million, just in case any Swansea fans wanted to know the price. But apart from that, no, we've got an exciting few weeks. I think, like you said, there's a few teams that you've got your eye on to talk about in the next few weeks. Definitely OECO is a team I think we should talk about in the coming weeks. And just briefly on the Stockholm derby, obviously that ended in a draw. And it was lively as ever. We did say we'd talk about it. It ended 1-1, which I think is a good result for Diff because they've got obviously one eye on the Chelsea game. So yeah, that's it really.
Thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you next time on the Nordic Football Podcast. From me and Jonathan, it's goodbye. Take care, stay safe, and enjoy the football on this week. And let's see what the results bring us in the Europa League and Conference League. Take care, y'all.